And so it's certainly not all lawsuits are bad, and there absolutely is a place for the tort system, and we should have a healthy and robust tort system. My organization, for example, advocates for appropriate funding of our courts so that people who need access to them can get them. But what has happened is because we have so many avenues, and it's so easy to file these kind of ridiculous or unjustified lawsuits, is that they don't go to trial. Like they don't go to trial. What happens is it's quicker and easier for a business to settle than to pay their own lawyers to fight the case and win. And so, for example, the Americans with Disabilities Act, federal law, noble intentions, good idea. All people deserve the same access to any business or any accommodation that anybody else does. And the concept is that having an unaccessible business is the same as saying black people need to drink at this other drinking fountain. And that's a form of discrimination, and we're going to outlaw that. Well, what we did when we passed the Americans with Disabilities Act, and this was passed under a Republican president authored by a Republican senator who didn't want to spend government money in enforcing it, they said, well, let's not spend any money on enforcement of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Let's leave it to the private sector. And so the ADA is enforced by individual lawsuits against businesses who are able then to get attorney's fees for suing you, which is basically, let me pay you to sue me. And then what we did in California was we made it even worse by putting every ADA violation under our UNRU Act, which is our anti-discrimination law, which allows attorneys to get attorney's fees. Other states have this same individual enforcement, but you only get to sue if you've actually suffered harm. And in California, you can sue just because it's not accessible, even if there's no harm. So what we have now in California, decades after the passage of the ADA, is we still have many, many businesses that aren't compliant. If it was a regulation for which there was a government agency to go after and find out if your business was compliant or not, we'd be a lot more compliant. Because you know if you were compliant or not, you get like a fix-it ticket, you become compliant. Well, we still have many businesses that aren't compliant, many businesses that don't know that they're not compliant, and then we have lawyers going around suing businesses in exchange for money, not even requiring that the businesses become compliant. And so that was just a spectacular failure of government, both on the federal level and on the state level. And I mean, I can't really even say I blame the lawyers for exploiting it. You know what I mean? Like they're behaving fully legally within the bounds of the law. It's our fault for setting up those rules that they are using to their advantage.
And I just have one point on that. I agree with you that Sacramento is polarized. I think term limits has been a colossal failure, as Dorothy said. Legislators that are up there, they're only there for 6 years. They don't, digging into oversight of regulatory agencies is difficult. Short time. Don't have the knowledge base, etc. So I think that with the passage of the last term limit reform, where everyone has 12 years, I think that is helpful because before term limits, you could, electeds had policy areas that they were the go-to on, regardless of where they were from, and knew how that policy worked and knew what to do with it. So I think that that's a help, but I think Sacramento is completely polarized. I also think that term limits and all of this came about of government get out of the way, government shouldn't exist, sort of attitude of everyone. And what's happened now is that we've cut, and there are not enough employees in the state government to do the work. I mean, I know at the Coastal Commission, I am constantly like, why is this permit not being processed? Why is this? Well, we cut their staff. They're 75 staff short. All their staff work tons of hours. I mean, I know them. I talk to them all the time. And so it's it's contrary. You wouldn't think, oh, let's put more government employees to make the process work better. But that's really fundamentally to have the oversight, to do the work, to do the enforcement. You would be better off.
I happen to disagree, because I think the problem really is everyone up in the state government, local government, I'll take it to my local, Glendale, Burbank, Pasadena, Los Angeles. They're paralyzed to make a decision. They're afraid of criticism. They're afraid of making a decision because if they make a decision, it's not what the supervisor would make. Maybe they're going to lose their classified union job. And it's like, that's where we're stuck. Nobody's empowered because I know if I need to get a job done, I know the leadership. I know the elected people, I know the senior planners, I go right to the top. And I can pretty much get the answer that I'm going to need most of the time. Whether it's a yes or no. What I can't live with is a maybe. Yeah, no, I can get it. Maybe it's not the answer. So, you know, the fact that you want more people to kind of make more decisions, they're not making the decisions you're supposed to make right now. So just make a decision. Tell me no. Fine, I'll move to another county.
I just built a house, my own, that was the general contractor on it. I completely hear you. It is the most frustrating process. The firefighters, I have 75 sprinkler heads in my house that don't water the lawn. So, I mean, it's crazy. So I feel your pain. It is frustrating here. Obviously,
The answer is not more people. The answer really is more decisions. Just make some decisions. I mean, that's the problem. I mean, I primarily work in LA County. Glendale, Burbank, Pasadena, the dominant towns. And, you know, you couldn't work in more left-wing towns to get a decision on it. They're horrible. And I deal with every one of the boards that you mentioned. Water resources work because I do a lot of work there. So chromium is certainly contaminated. And we have a lot of flammable places. Machine shops, plastic shops. I deal with every branch of government. And they're all paralyzed saying yes or no.
You know, to go back to your question, since you did address it to me as well, and Kim covered it very well, so I won't go into all that. But real simply, I think because we have so many regulations, we have dealt with the major abuses like what you're talking about. We have plenty of regulations, and we do need enforcement of those. And people need to know what the playing field is, and we don't need to have the gotcha lawyers coming along and creating some huge disparity. But one of the biggest complaints that I've had was from a guy who said, when I try to hire people, oh my God, it's like a minefield. If I do this, I could get sued. If I don't do this, I could get sued. So you know what they do? This guy told me the only reason he doesn't take his 400 jobs at his manufacturing company to Nevada, to Prim, Nevada, he's already picked out a house, is because of his in-laws. He said the minute that his in-laws move, he is taking his business and he will save $1 million a year on taxes. And he's already an extremely wealthy guy. And he will also, he said, the biggest thing I'm looking forward to is the time that I will save not having to deal with all these stupid regulations and the attitudes of the regulators on every different myriad that everybody's talking about. But let me tell you the other part that I think happens. If you think about why do we have regulations, I agree we need some framework of regulation. We don't want to go back to the Industrial Revolution where children are working, where we have sweatshops. But because we have so many regulations in California, and because California drove so many of my customers out of this state, whether they were in aerospace or in general plastics manufacturing, they've gone to other countries where they now have chromium dumped in plumes underneath the water reservoirs. So now we're going to have these massive problems that are going to happen somewhere else. And all these people who talk about, oh, we've done this wonderful green thing to protect everybody. No, all you've done is shift it somewhere else where it's a wild frontier. There's zero regulation whatsoever. And I agree, the free market does need some regulation. But there has to be balance. And the thing we're hearing is there is no balance whatsoever because the people who are regulated have no input and no power and no representation. And that is what we have to change.
I think Ken did a question.
Thank you, Janelle. Ken Phelps with the Valley Economic Alliance. I'm going to try to put a more positive piece on this. So what can be done to replicate good regulations that support the Golden State's economic priorities? Let me give you an example. If the state elected officials and their staff do not pass a budget in California, they don't get paid. So there's an incentive there. So what could be that incentive to go ahead and make good regulations?
It's a really good question, and it would be fun to really delve into it because we're searching for those. We're really searching for how do we align the incentives so that growing the business community, adding jobs, having a vibrant economy is lined up with what the inspectors and regulatory agents' mission is. And I was going to say a little earlier, you know, we have environmental agencies now, for example, who are so mission-driven on the environmental issues that that's how they're measured in terms of success or failure. What we need to do is broaden their mission so that it includes satisfaction of the businesses that they're regulating, feedback from stakeholder groups of the industries that they're regulating on how they're doing, how quick they're responding, how good their decision-making is on the issues before them, so that there's feedback. And here's key, and this goes to Tim's point, you've got to have leadership in the state that enforces that new mission. Right now, one of the gaps is we have leadership that does not think we have a bad business climate in the state. You're going to hear from someone at noon or thereafter who calls some of us declinists because we don't talk up how wonderful California is. And that by just talking about these difficult issues, we're suggesting people shouldn't come and invest here, like we're causing the problem or something, and it's just a marketing issue. I'm trying to be respectful, but we have data that shows it's not true.
A follow-up to that then would be, there is no priorities that are set for each of these regulatory agencies that focus in on, as an example, one of the priorities for California and many states in the U.S. is jobs, jobs, jobs. Everybody knows that. So there is no regulatory for each of these departments to focus in on the economy. Is that correct?
And who can do the analysis of that? Who could come in as kind of like an auditor or whoever, an outside group, an OMB type management consulting function that could come into the agencies and say, how are you doing? Let's improve your operation here. Yeah, we know you want to do these inspections and all that kind of stuff, but are you doing them quick enough? Or are you focusing on the right ones? How do people feel about you? There's none of that sort of outside looking in kind of activity going on in California. It's just very balkanized and very insular, and we need to break some of these barriers down and take honest looks at ourselves.
I have a thought on a regulation. It's a little shocking. I don't believe that we should, I don't really believe we need any more laws, but there's one law that the same business owner that I had lunch with asked for. He said he would like to see every single regulation, every law that applies to his business to apply to every government agency, every municipality. I know you guys are laughing, but let me tell you something. When we want to remodel an office in the California State Assembly, you know what we do? We just go in there and do it. We don't get permits. We don't talk to anybody. We don't analyze it because the law doesn't apply to us. When I want to fire somebody, we have a whole team of lawyers that just lines up and says, here's what we can do, because you're at will. Now, if you're an employer, there is no at-will employment. You are on the hook. If a person is a certain age, you can't fire them. If a person doesn't do a good job, you better document every bit of it. With us, don't need any of it. We don't, the California State Assembly does not live by the same laws. If it did, can you imagine the nightmare it would be to continue to grow government and expand at the rate that they expanded? It's one of the, we've hired, during this recession, we've hired more and more people. I don't think we need any more people in government. We need less rules. Let me give you one other example. The CARB agency. I have 11 cement plants in my district. Now we have 8. They're taking one of the fees that supports CARB, and they said, oh, okay, and most of you, if you own a business, if you have fewer customers, then you fire some salesmen, let them go, right? You need less of a workforce. No, the bureaucracy is continuing to grow as their mission grows. It has nothing to do with how many customers there are out there, if you want to call the cement plant a customer. So they said, we are going to now take the fee and increase it on the 8 who survived. So now you're paying more because you survived. So what is the incentive? The perverse incentive is get out of the state of California and just send the cement back by truck from Nevada or Arizona. The gas is cheaper over there. Come tear up our roads and pollute, but don't bring us any revenue. That's brilliant.
It's a little similar to Ken's, but Bike is an advocacy group, and so I would like to hear from each of you, maybe what are the top 1 or 2 issues that we as an advocacy group could support in the coming year? We are looking at our legislative agenda for next year. Give you
unfortunately, at this point, it's really hard to get them out of the first committee, but perhaps with Micah's help, we can change that. So, for example, one of the things we should do is we should reform our class action laws. You get in the mail little postcards about a lawsuit against some company that you had bought a product from that you probably didn't even know you had a problem with or realized you were represented by a lawyer and there's a lawsuit against them. And then what happens in those lawsuits is once that class is certified, meaning once the judge says there's enough people in a similar situation, then the defendant company pretty much has to hold up their hands and pay out. Class action lawsuits never, ever, ever go to trial. Not never, very rarely go to trial, especially in consumer product cases, which are the ones you get those notices about. And so the reason that is because once the class is certified, the risk to the defendant company is so high that it's just cheaper to pay out. And so one of the things that we could do in California, and if you're the plaintiff lawyer in that case trying to prove that the class of Nutella buyers or Listerine buyers or Netflix users or Apple customers are sufficiently similar to warrant being a class, once that class is certified, the defendant company settles. But if for some reason the judge failed to certify a class and the judge said, no, 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 you're not a class, you as the plaintiff get to appeal that class certification decision, but as the defendant, you don't. The defendant, you don't get to appeal unless you take it to trial and lose. And no defendant is going to take it to trial and lose, they're just going to pay out. And so if we change California's class action laws to allow both to give the defendant the same right that the plaintiff has, which is the right to appeal the class certification decision, that's one relatively minor, fair reform that would actually make a big difference over the course of time. It would allow the development of fair class action laws. You could have punitive damages, so that took a long time to explain. My other two I'll say quickly. The other two, punitive damages are lawsuits, are damages against business. You can't put a business in jail. If they do something horrible, you can just make them pay more money. Juries are spectacularly bad at assessing the amount. All research shows that juries are spectacularly bad at assessing the proper amount to punish business of doing that. They think that if it's a business and they have a lot of money, they should assess that. Well, it's not like the business, the CEO doesn't have gold bullion in his office that he takes out and pays that way. He just charges us all more for the next couple of years. He doesn't like take his kids out of private school and sell his yacht. You know what I mean? He doesn't suffer at all. Like they pass it on. So juries are bad at assessing that, but we don't have a better way of punishing businesses. And so one thing that we could do is we say juries decide whether punitive damages are warranted, and then you allow a judge to assess the amount of punitive damages. And another thing you could do is have a government standards defense, whereas if the government told you to do something, like required you to do it, and then you were following the government rules, but in so doing ended up causing harm to somebody, you could have to pay for that harm, but you wouldn't be hit with punitive damages. Because we have many instances where businesses were doing exactly what they were required to do, and then later not only got hit with lawsuits, which I'm not saying are always wrong, but that they were hit with punitive damages. And then finally, the last one is that rather than a request for an affirmative reform or request for VICA's support in trying to stop legislation, we should not promote legislation that allows individual enforcement by private attorneys. So just like the ADA, we left the enforcement to individual attorneys, and that's why you end up with these shakedown lawsuits against small businesses. When we have a new law or a new prohibition, we should limit the enforcement to prosecutors or government regulators on behalf of harmed individuals, or if you're going to allow individual lawsuits, only allow them when somebody has actually suffered harm. Don't allow lawyers who might have a profit motive to sue business as a way to make money.
There you go, there's your,
Your
legislative agenda for the year.
We'll be supporting those as well, and we have in the past. It looks like sequel reform is teed up for next year, and I would encourage you all to get involved in that. It's very important. It was one of the highlights of our survey that people, there's so much uncertainty, it takes so long to get a permit that anybody wants to do anything. They just go, it'll take me 6 months in Texas, it'll take me 2 years in California. I'm just not going to go to California. So, and the litigation risks on CEQA are really important to overcome. So that would be the key substantive area to focus on next year. But we, as a manufacturing association, are also looking at trying to expand and make even more effective the requirement for economic analysis so that at least we know what it's going to cost to do these things. Because to the extent that there can be put any kind of a break or balance to what we're doing, we need to understand the cost of it. Then we can go ahead with our eyes open about, okay, we've got to do this for public health reasons, but you know what, it's going to cost this much. So maybe there needs to be some countervailing tax policy change or some mitigation of some other regulation to overcome that cost. We don't know what the impacts are if we can't make good decisions. And Senate Bill 617 was a good start. That needs to be expanded, more regulations, and agencies need to be encouraged to embrace that. It's just a regular thing that they do, and not something extra that needs to be forced on them. That's not, it's hard to put that kind of thing in a bill, but that's the kind of advocacy you could do at the leadership level. And I think this governor, if he's around for another 4 years, and his team, they hear from groups like yours with a kind of a principled statement like that. Because there's so much authority they have to fix things already. They don't need laws. Just do this right. Just do this smart. That's very helpful to hear from leadership like this.
I just have to say, I agree. I mean, I think Kim's ideas are really good and something that is difficult to get in Sacramento, but is worth, pursuing. And I agree. I think the governor is, if you come in with, not the sky is falling, but with a reasoned argument and exact specific details, that I know, the him and the team, and they are very interested in that and even come into business. So I think there are opportunities, and certainly secret reform is, teed up. Gerald Steinberg has a working group already started that is balancing it out greatly here. So, that's a good opportunity. But going in and your involvement in the secret reform should be, based on specifics and not just, film.
I'm going to agree with everything that's been said prior to this on this question. I'm also going to agree with Wendy on one thing, that we really need to take the uncertainty out of the business environment. And I appreciate FICA's leadership, because you guys come in and you educate us. You bring specific industry people who are experts or who are actual active participants, businesses who operate in that field. And you come to our offices and you tell us about issues. You tell us how regulations are affecting you. The only thing I could say that would really improve that, and I don't know if you guys already do it, but I think you ought to have a fund where you put aside some money for a particular day to come to Sacramento. Not a day that you say is the lobby day, I know you already do that, but to fill up buses with real business owners, to go up there and lobby on particular horrible bills, to fill up the committee room, and really make it a point. Because when we've done that this year on a number of different bills, and oftentimes I've invited people and told them, hey, I'll wear the same t-shirt just like the SEIU does, and then they can see that you're unified in something. I'm not saying business owners should wear t-shirts, but maybe, all have the same suit and tie or the same color tie. I don't know what you do, but okay.
No t-shirts.
But the bottom line is, people see that you took time off work, you came there, and that does have a dramatic impact. It's grassroots based, but there is nothing more powerful than sitting in a committee and listening to a real business owner who is as passionate as some of you all have been here about how it's affecting you and how you really want to comply with the law, but for crying out loud, here's the unintended consequence that all you guys in here, if you were all assemblymen, most of you would not have owned a business, by the way. The vast majority of assemblymen and senators that are serving right now have never signed a paycheck, except for the back. And that, to me, is a mistake.
We have time for, I think, probably one more question. I know you were waiting, and I'll get to you credit if we have a moment.
Very quickly, along the lines of tort reform and frivolous lawsuits, what about lose a case, and the case of costs? We hate to shake down lawsuits instead of suing for $80,000, however, they're willing to settle for $5,000. The question is, do you invest $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 to win, then have an empty, or do you settle for $5,000? It's nothing but a shakedown. What about losing a case?
We actually this is gonna make me sound like a total wimp, but we don't support or advocate loser pays because of access issues. There are some appropriate lawsuits, and loser pays could lead to some sort of legitimate lawsuits not seeing the light of day. There are a lot of aspects of loser pays that would seriously fix the problem. You know, there's no doubt to that, and I've had some, like I'm sure Tim Donnelly and I have never had this conversation, but I've had a couple other Republican legislators that are like, why don't you support loser pays? And I say, it's never gonna go anywhere. In order to do anything, I need Democratic support. There's some legitimate concerns to it that I think make some sense, and so I'm not gonna do that. And then they're like, what kind of tort reform organization are you? So we, you know, it's just, it's at this point in California, it is so far away from the realm of possibility that we actually have far more modest goals, but that's the end.
I absolutely support it. I don't have modest goals. I think we should. Everybody wants a fair society. I want a free society. And the bottom line is that being a lawyer is a business. Just like being a doctor, just like being anything else, yeah, they're professions, but they're also a business at the end of the day. So when you, I assume, own a business, I own a business, there are risks involved. There's the risk when you hire somebody. There's the risk when somebody comes to visit your property and slips and falls. The next thing you know, you're being sued. There's the risk that you might deliver a product that's faulty and be sued or have to replace the product. There's all these risks. You're up at 3 o'clock in the morning filling out government forms and trying to keep the regulators off your back. You have to collect sales tax, and if you make any mistakes there, good Lord, not only are you penalized, there's fines, penalties, and everything else, and interest. And by the way, if the reverse is true and the government owes you money, we don't pay you any interest. By the way, I ran that bill, trying to get some parity and some fairness. Couldn't get it out of the Revenue and Taxation Committee. But here's just a simple thought. Why not make the gotcha lawyers, the shakedown lawsuits, why not make them take the same business risk? Because what it will do is it will automatically let the free market shake out the bad lawsuits. The good ones will go forward. If there's some that have merit, as Kim's saying, you know what, eventually, I've seen people that are just one-man little armies that raise their voice loud enough, they get into the media. You can go raise money to sue somebody. You can get a pro bono lawyer. If you're passionate enough and you have a righteous cause, you will eventually prevail. It just may take a little bit of time. But I think we need that balance because it is completely out of control. And it's one of those things that creates so much uncertainty. It would be the quickest, fastest way to signal to the rest of the world, come to California. You know, enjoy the sunshine. And by the way, we used to be one of the freest states in the Union. The New York Times did an article and documented the death by 1,000 cuts where we have lost so much freedom as individuals, as business owners. The government is now the gravest threat to your liberty. The government is the greatest threat to your pocketbook, and it is the greatest threat to your livelihood and to your children's future, and that is 100% preventable.
So Janelle, can I use some of my funny voice? Yes, because I'm all set. Okay. I couldn't figure out a way to weave it in. Sorry for my inelegance here. But some of these are good. So this is a digital thermometer that can be used to take a person's temperature in several different ways that says, once used rectally, the thermometer should not be used orally. A household iron that says, never iron clothes while they are being worn. Label on a hair dryer, do not use while sleeping. Drain cleaner. If you do not understand or cannot read all directions, cautions, and warnings, do not use this product. Smoke detector. Do not use the silence feature in an emergency. It will not extinguish the fire. A massage chair. Do not use the massage chair without clothing, and never force any body part into the backrest area while the rollers are moving. Well, like they didn't, the lawyers didn't come up with that one on their own. You know, there had to be something in the sauce that would say that.
That's needed that morning.
A car sunshield, you know, those that do not drive with sunshield in place.
I need that one.
Laser printer, do not eat toner. This one must not have come from, well, that's parts of California Tahoe where this could apply. For a snow blower, do not use on roof. And a dishwasher that says, do not allow children to play in the dishwasher. Some of my favorites.
So that's actually all the time that we have for the panel today. Once again, I'd like to thank our runway sponsor, Clear Channel, and let's also give a big round of applause to our panel. Please also make sure you fill out your exit survey.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lane Lawson. Welcome to Sinking in Quicksand panel with the VICA's 24th Annual Business Forecast Conference. I'm the Director of Public Affairs for Clear Channel Outdoor and a proud sponsor of this track. I'd also like to thank our panel sponsor today, Manpower. At your seat, there is an exit survey, and I encourage you to fill it out. And at the end of the panel here, please hand it to our VICA representatives in the back of the room. It helps us keep track of the panel discussion and how informative it is so we can improve next year if we need to. It's my pleasure to introduce you to the moderator of this panel, Janelle Beeler, Divisional Sales Director for Manpower. Janelle, thank you for agreeing to be the moderator for this morning's panel.
Thank you, Lane. Good morning, everyone. The theme of the panel is Sinking in Quicksand in reference to California's overregulation. So we've got a great panel lined up, but let me first go ahead and also thank Clear Channel Outdoor for being our runway sponsor. The biographies of each of the panelists are already in your journal, so I'm going to ask them to make some very brief introductions so that we have more time for your questions. We'll go ahead and start here.
Hi, good morning. I'm Assemblyman Tim Donnelly. I represent the 59th District, which is one of the most sprawling districts in the entire state. It starts in La Crescenta, covers all the foothills, and goes all the way out to the Southern Valley at the very easternmost point. You know, I spent 20 years in the manufacturing sector, plastics injection molding. I used to call on companies out here as I drove past some of the streets. The sad thing is that they're just memories. I remember going into many of these factories where they were teaming enterprises with 300, 400, 500 employees, when they were supporting the aerospace industry. They were supporting all kinds of different industries that were based here in Southern California. We were the leaders. We had this real building block of manufacturing. And I didn't know then, when I started walking into factories and they said, hey, we're selling off our equipment, if you can maybe you can make a few bucks selling some equipment to some other people that are staying here in California working. And they would tell me about the overregulation and the insanity and the zero tolerance and the fines and the fees. And after a while, they got the impression that California really didn't want them here. And, you know, I think, the other day I was driving home. I live up in Lake Arrowhead, not Lake Arrowhead, Twin Peaks. And we have this little mountain road. Many of you have probably driven up there. And you know what happens when you're driving and everything's just going great and you're just loving it. You look out there, you see the sun, you see the mountains, and you're just snaking along and everything's going perfect. And all of a sudden there's a slow car. And I was that slow car the other day. And I looked in my rearview mirror and there's this slick new convertible that just was raring to go. And you know what it made me think of? It made me think of the government. Because I am the government now, basically. And here I was in this guy's way. And I had a fundamental choice. I could either get out of his way, pull over the turnout that the law says, or I could elect to just stay in his way and slow it down, put on my brakes, and get angry because he got too close to my bumper. You know what I did? I pulled over. And as soon as I pulled into the turnout, he honked and he waved and he just took off. Can you imagine if we could get the government out of the way of the California economy? What a great engine of growth we could be
Mitchell, and I'm very happy to be here. I currently serve on the California Coastal Commission as a governor's appointee, actually Schwarzenegger appointee that Jerry Brown has lovely kept with me. I have a consulting business, and I spent about 15 years working in Sacramento. And as Dorothy knows, my first job out of college was the California Manufacturing Association, before they even had technology. Right, it was the training ground. So I come from a little bit different perspective than the Assemblyman. Certainly, I think that there are a lot of regulations on the books that need to be revised and reviewed. You know, a sunset process, and certainly, you know, there's laws on the books in the 1980s that Richard Katz passed, and that should all be reviewed. However, I think that the regulations in the state actually do good for us. I know, you know, in the old days, the smog in Los Angeles, when Richard was growing up here, you couldn't ride your bike, you couldn't play outside, because there were smog roads that would hurt your lungs. You know, the South Coast Air Quality Management District passed regulations that lighter fluid had to be reformed to have lower volatility chemicals, and a bunch of other regulations that actually clean our air in California. So I think that there are some regulations that we should, you know, we need to embrace, and there are some that need to be reviewed. I also believe that, you know, CEQA reform is very important. I think that everyone in Sacramento, everyone that I've talked to, and boards that I serve on, is you know, taking a serious look at CEQA reform. But I also believe that businesses, and I've worked for developers and large corporations, really want a bar. They just want to know where it is. Set the bar high, as we do in California, and they'll meet it. But don't move the bar halfway through the process. That's what's frustrating. And the frustrating part about CEQA is, I think, the litigation and the lawsuits that create uncertainty in the process. So I certainly believe that there is room for reform, but we have a lot of great laws on the books that actually make California, you know, who we are. We have, you know, more people and use less water. We have clean beaches. We have clean air. We have a coastline that's, you know, protected and open and with public access. That would not happen in a purely free market if there were no regulations. So I think we need to be balanced, and I'm concerned sort of the mindset these days of of groups talking about government's all bad and, you know, they need to just get out of the way. Government has a role protecting public health and safety, and that discounts completely the role that government has in that process. And I think that the dialogue now is, you know, we're at a place where we, you know, no one wants to pay more taxes, and so our schools are declining, our infrastructure is declining. I'm voting for Prop 30, and it's going to tax me a lot. But I don't think it's right that in California today, I don't send my kid to public school, I send them to private school. That costs a fortune. But most people do not have that choice. They have to send their child to a school that's a subpar education, and that's not fair. I was at a dinner last week with Gavin Newsom, a friend of his who owns a business in Northern California, said, my biggest problem is finding skilled workforce. He said, I have 50 jobs, but I don't have the skilled workforce. They all have to be, you know, we have to get them in through visas, et cetera. That's a fundamental problem, and I think that is more damaging to businesses, because that's an intangible that they can't control if they're not skilled workforce, than overregulation. So I think, you know, we need to refocus and understand that government has a role. It's not the role of, you know, acting as a business, because if they did, they'd cut out all the schools, because those are just cost drivers. And so there's a role to government, there's a purpose, and while we need reforms in many of the regulations, and certainly in CEQA, we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and sort of the dialogue around not that government should just get out of the way, I think really defeats all of Californians and all of us for, you know, making this state a better place.
Thanks, everybody, for choosing our section here. Promise it'll be the best one, because you won't know what's going on with it. I am the Vice President of Government Relations for the California Manufacturers and Technology Association, so we're a Sacramento-based trade association that includes many of the largest as well as medium and small manufacturers in the state. We have research, just to tee this up. California historically has been a huge industrial state, as you know. Between 1977 and 2001, we got about 5.6% of the U.S. investments in manufacturing. This is dollars put into the state in manufacturing expansions or new facilities. So that was a relatively high level, perhaps not as much as we'd like. We have about 11%, 10 or 11% of the total manufacturing in the state, so that rate of investment is a little bit lower than kind of a maintenance mode. However, what's really, really disturbing is that since 2001, our share of national investment has dropped down to an average of 1.9%. So the trend is very alarming. We are losing the muscle in our manufacturing base, and we think that the job loss will follow as facilities become less and less competitive, less modern, and we see this sort of outflow of capital. We did a survey this year to find out more about why this is happening in the state, and the three main reasons that decision makers told us, and these are folks that had made investments in the prior 2 years. They said, first of all, 82% of those that we surveyed did not consider California when expanding or opening a new facility. Many of the reasons they gave were highly impacted by state policy. These included a costly and complicated tax system, a poor regulatory environment, that's why we're here today, high labor costs, and lack of incentives and credits. So the difficult regulatory environment was teed up frequently by the folks that responded to the question about why is manufacturing not investing in the state. There's some opportunities as manufacturing is coming back to the United States from offshore. You may have heard about the reshoring that's happening as people find it's not so great to do business in China as they thought. Perhaps wages are going up there, so the competitive reason to be offshore is not as high as it used to be. All sorts of logistical reasons. Anyway, we have an opportunity in the U.S. to regrow manufacturing. The question is whether California is going to set itself up to be able to attract our fair share of manufacturing.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Kim Stone. I'm the president of the Civil Justice Association of California. We are a nonprofit membership association that fights against excessive lawsuits. VICA is a member of ours and works in one-on-one with us on some candidate research stuff. And I was invited to be on this panel, I think, to talk about regulation through litigation. When I told my husband that, he goes, "Oh, honey, nobody's going to come." Like, sounds so boring. I disagree, and so I really tried hard to find some things and some examples of regulation through litigation that are both shocking and entertaining. And so to give you, as a moderator, an incentive to ask me questions throughout the panel, I'm going to start by sharing a couple examples of lawsuits that have led to, so that, there's normal regulations that like government pass and they say you have to do this, and if you don't do this business, we will fine you. But then regulation through litigation is when there's a lawsuit, the result of which is so strong or so impactful that you and your lawyers take notice of that and you start changing your behavior as a result of that. And one of the biggest examples of that is warning labels, right? So all these warning labels are because there was like some idiot that, didn't do the thing that they needed the warning label for. And so I have a long list of these. I'm not going to read them all right now, but some of them, there's a label on a folding baby stroller that says, "Remove child before folding." A 3-pronged hook bass fishing lure that says, "Harmful if swallowed." And a flushable toilet brush that says, "Do not use for personal hygiene." And there are many others. I'm not going to give them all right now, because I'm going to prove my husband wrong. This topic can and should be interesting. But the difficult thing for you as business owners and business providers in California is that in California we really have the worst of all possible worlds. We have strong regulation by government, and we have an extremely active trial bar that the California legislature promotes and encourages. So not only are you under attack and subject to strong regulation and overrules with many times strict penalties by the government, but you're going to be sued for things you don't even know were illegal at the time that you did them, or there was anything wrong with them. And we elect legislators who set up systems to allow, and in some cases even encourage, that to continue. And so before I close my concluding remarks, because I do lead a membership association, I brought a one-page information sheet about us and a thing for you to fill out to get more information that I'll pass around. So thank you.
I have a couple of questions to ask directly to the panelists, and then we'll open it up to you. I'm sure you have a lot of questions that you would like to have answered as well. But let's go ahead and start with Wendy. You kind of alluded to this in your opening statement, but maybe you can expand on why we need regulation.
Well, as I said, I think regulations have a role in moving businesses and individuals in the right direction. Again, as Kim said, the rules you're going to follow them. Most good businesses, business practice, that's what they do. So, and then there's a role for government in that, setting those regulations. So, I agree that there's too much litigation, and that is a problem in California. But certainly we can't get rid of the regulations to make California work, because then our economy would deteriorate and our state would deteriorate. So, certainly you see I serve on the Coastal Commission, and it's virtually impossible to build anything on the coastline, which is very frustrating for people, and I totally understand that. However, we have an open, beautiful coast. We have public access everywhere. If we're not Florida, and I don't think we want to be Florida. We want to be able to drive the big Sur coast and see all the open space, and protecting that beauty is something that wouldn't be done if it was left to our business.
Assembly and Donnelly, you're probably the most vocal opponent of regulation. So in response to Wendy, do you have any comments on that, or are there any regulations that maybe you want to talk about that you do like or maybe are good?
The first part of that question is going to be a lot easier than the second part. Because as I listened to Wendy, I thought she made a compelling case for how beautiful California is. And we all understand there's a common sense need for a few framework regulations. Every society must have those. But I was reaching in my pocket looking for my copy of the Constitution that I carry with me everywhere. The U.S. Constitution is one of the thinnest, smallest, tiniest little books. They gave us some clear points. They said the purpose of government in the Declaration, which I consider to be the introduction. The Declaration, which is our founding document, says government's role is to secure these rights, the rights that are inalienable that come from the Creator: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The pursuit of happiness was at one time thought to be private property rights, and that was a big debate that they had. Well, everybody knows in California you don't have private property rights anymore when the government can come onto your land and tell you what to do, because we passed so many environmental laws. There's so many different agencies that can come. If you try to build anything, or you try to expand anywhere, even out in huge tracts in my district, which are wide open land in San Bernardino County, we talk about sequel reform. Holy moly. The reason that people aren't investing in California is the coastline might look beautiful, and then all of a sudden as they get close to the water, they hear that Jaws music. And that's the trial lawyers who are there, along with the environmental, what I call the enviro-fascists, who decide, oh, I'm going to sue your project if you don't do it this way. And I think that there's so many areas where we could beat back these extreme regulations, and until we do that, and I think if there's one regulation I think we need serious, substantive tort reform with teeth. to restrict the trial lawyers and the gotcha lawyers. I had lunch with a guy, I asked him, what is the biggest problem in California? He polled all of his customers. He brought me a 3-page list, and he started out by saying, the way that I find out about new regulations is either on the golf course from one of my buddies, the state doesn't even have the decency to send me a letter, or I find out from an attorney who was suing me because I violated a law I'd never heard of.
And I would just say that I think I agree with you completely on the protecting life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but we all need to, in order to pursue happiness, clean water, clean air, transportation systems, to make California, to make humans be happy on this planet. So, I just think, cutting regulations isn't, you would not have happiness if their air wasn't cleaner, if our water wasn't cleaner, et cetera. And then as far as the regulations, I think that San Bernardino can do, local government certainly can do a lot for streamlining new projects, et cetera. So, working with the locals, I think that that's an opportunity to make that happen. Obviously the county is hurting from serious unemployment, and I don't think that's...
Well, I wish what you're saying is true, but I know of a guy, private companies on private land trying to put in a solar installation. We're the green state, right? We're obsessed with green. This should be a great project. It should be streamlined. It took 4 years. San Bernardino County, out in the middle of nowhere, where there's nothing, there's a couple of tortoises. They had to arm wrestle with all these government agencies. They had threats of lawsuits unless they hired union workers, so nobody in my district got a job. They had union workers driving up from Los Angeles because they threatened to sue. And so you have this green blackmail that goes on. And this is a private company on private land. When you do it on BLM land, if you actually work on the government land, all of a sudden all of these restrictions are gone. And I think that's wrong. When a private company wants to do something on their own private property, and they're not trying to harm anything or anyone, and they're doing something that supposedly we all think is this great value, then you would think that government could get out of the way of that. And that's all we're asking. But every time you turn around, there's some new regulation or law, whether it's state, federal. I wish the US EPA was here because I have a lot of questions for them.
Well, I think, I know that Kern County has some streamlining for wind and solar. So, because I agree with you, I think, and all my environmental and environmental board I sit on, you cannot oppose a renewable project because you lose your credibility. You can't say we need renewables, and I've fought a few desert tortoises in my day, so I hear you being on that as well. Sorry, did you talk?
Do you have another question you want to ask? I've got to respect.
Go ahead, Tony. Okay.
The manufacturers are interested in not necessarily deciding whether a particular regulation is good or bad. What we've been really focused on is how are the regulations developed, what kind of authority do the agencies have, what kind of oversight or independent analysis is done of the regulations, how effective are they, are there sunsets, does the legislature retain enough control over the agencies and the policies that they're supposed to be implementing to step in if the agency's running amok? Is the enforcement fair? Is it even-handed? Are there opportunities to cure? Are the penalties at the right level? All of these kinds of things we feel in the last few decades, so this is a broader statement, has been hugely ignored and abandoned by the legislature. They've shifted power to the agencies, so the executive branch of the legislature has way more authority than they should. The elected folks have essentially said, it's complicated, it's technical, we don't really know what to do. Is it going to help me get elected to deal with this issue? These kinds of things go through elected officials' heads when they're deciding whether or not to engage on a regulatory issue on behalf of their constituents. So we need to wrest control back from the agencies, give it back to the legislature. We passed a bill last year, I think it was last year, Senate Bill 617, which requires large big major regulations that are priced at about 50 million or above to go through a major economic analysis going forward. So it was a nice reform. It doesn't kick in until November 2013. So all the current regulations won't be subject to it, but it's a step in the right direction to start increasing the sunshine and the ability to understand what the impacts of regulations are. Kim?
So this is the thing. Regulations aren't bad. We need regulations. When these that's one of the purposes of government, is to tell us how to behave, so that we all behave nicely together. We have, it's like manners, but just on a much higher and more complicated, more technical level. And government regulation should, in theory, be able to tell you as business what you can and what you can't do ahead of time in a way that you can plan accordingly in a predictable fashion. And if government regulation did that in order to protect public safety, promote free competition, regulate business conduct, like that would be good, right? Like that's the goal. That's what we're all sort of aspiring for. Public regulation by government, in theory, is accountable because if we can elect or unelect the leaders who promote those regulations, if we think that what they're doing is wrong, we can fire them and hire new people to do so. Regulation by government is also democratic, right? Because we select the people who make the regulations, so we're sort of choosing the regulations that we're willing to accept. And if you're not politically active and you're not making a thing, then you are choosing to accept the current system that we've got, whether it's an affirmative, active choice or not, it's still a choice. The cons to government regulation that academics talk about are that, well, they may stifle innovation, the regulators may not be educated about the industries that they're regulating, and it might stifle innovation. They may be slow, kind of like Assemblymember Donnelly's example, it may slow things down. Regulation by trial lawyers or by individual plaintiffs' lawyers, on the other hand, provides business with zero level of predictability. You don't know what you're going to be sued for until they get you, right? You don't know how to act in a way to protect yourself from that kind of lawsuit. It apportions cost after a harm has happened rather than preventing a harm from happening. Trial lawyers aren't elected and entrusted with the public good to go around and make sure that you all do the right thing, and they're not accountable. I mean, nobody's sitting there saying, okay, you, trial lawyer who's suing Nutella because it's not really part of a healthy breakfast, that's a class action lawsuit.
It's not though, I don't know, I did it.
Well, yeah, who doesn't know that? I mean, what kind of idiot needs a trial lawyer to tell them that Nutella, it's chocolate peanut butter, it's delicious, but it's not healthy.
That sounds easy.
It's really good. I mean, who doesn't know that? And class action lawsuits started out, like Brown versus Board of Education was the class action lawsuit. That was, class action lawsuits against Denny's for refusing to serve black people, against airlines for requiring people who were called stewardesses at the time to quit when they got married. I mean, those were the kind of class action lawsuits that class action lawsuits were created for. And now we've got Nutella isn't part of a healthy breakfast, or I'm suing Netflix because I didn't really get unlimited movies that's fast enough in line. I mean, these things are ridiculous. They're kind of have become a travesty of what the justice system and regulating business is supposed to be about, because the trial lawyers are motivated by profit. I'm not saying that all government regulations are good and all lawsuits are bad, but we've just gotten to a point in California where we have both, and we sort of have the worst of both worlds. And then you have the whole federal government's regulations on top of it. I mean, there was an example. So the federal government mandated on auto manufacturers that you have to have airbags in all cars in 1988. And in 1987, Honda was sued by a woman who was injured in a car, in a car crash. Excuse me, Honda was sued in 1989 about an auto injury that happened in 1987 from a woman who was driving a Honda car without an airbag and died. Well, Honda was not required to have airbags in their cars at that time. time. And in fact, you could meet all of the highest safety standards imposed by the federal government at that time without having an airbag. No cars had airbags. Very few cars had airbags at that time. And at the time of the accident, those airbags were not required. So they were in full compliance with all government regulations. But because airbags were subsequently invented and required, Honda was sued, was hit with punitive damages because somebody was injured in a car crash. You know, through really very minimal no negligence on the part of the Honda. It was the other car that crashed into her that caused her the damage. And so when you have this intersection of government regulations and entrepreneurial private attorneys who were going to sue you in any way they can, that's really where we end up in the worst of all possible worlds for business.
And Kim, you shared with us some of the more maybe ridiculous kind of regulation-led litigation. But what are some of the notable ones that are happening in California?
Yeah, so there was another big example that just turned out to be a happier story, was the case of Brinker Restaurant Corporation, which is a big restaurant corporation that has many different popular restaurant chains. And for many years, it was unclear under California law what our employment law meant when it said employers are required to provide their employees with meal and rest breaks. And most people thought provide meant make available. Like if you're an hourly employee, you're entitled to 30 minutes of lunch and 2 15-minute breaks. And what you choose to do with that 30 minutes of lunch and 15-minute breaks is your own choice. Well, trial lawyers for many years went around suing businesses, generally with class action lawsuits where they aggregated many plaintiffs together, so they got bigger fees and bigger recoveries, saying that if the business didn't document that every employee took all 30 of their minutes for lunch and both full 15-minute rest breaks, then they didn't really provide that rest break, and they would be sued for those lawsuits. And there were hundreds of thousands of lawsuits in California about that, and businesses paid up. And one such case, Brinker Restaurant Corporation, which was a big company and that had the resources to do so, fought it and appealed it all the way to the California Supreme Court. And after about 4 years of uncertainty, the California Supreme Court decided what most of us think provide means, which is like, here's your break, you can do what you want on it, rather than make everybody sign at 10 and sign out at 10 and sign back in at 10:15, promising that they did no work during that period. And so those are just, I mean, it matters, and that's a tremendous cost for businesses to have to enforce that and oversee that. And when I talk to people who aren't from California, because my organization has a lot of California members, but we also have national companies that do business here that are headquartered someplace else, and we tout that as this like big victory that we got in California. Woo, we got Brinker, and they're like, yeah. You know, they think that that's shocking that it took us 4 years in the California Supreme Court to say provide means make available rather than provide means make sure that it is taken. And so it's just hard for you all to have to live under that.
Yeah. Most of us, I think, know a lot about what I'm talking about. But, you know, as a business person, I'm an industrial real estate broker. I work in multiple counties, small manufacturing. I work with a number of classic injection molding companies, so I'm sure we've got to share the story. We really are so constipated, so much regulation, that if I pull a permit to do an improvement today on a building that was built in 1986, my improvement might have 20 pages of plans, where when I built the building, I had 6. Okay, I get that. But when I do a fundamental remodel that takes me longer to get a permit to do the improvement than it took me to build the building, things are out of hand. I mean, I sell developments where someone wants to do a spec deal, just a spec home, or 5-minute or 20-minute, and the permitting process, the entitlement process is so labored. And it's not just from the manufacturing side. I've got to be in bed with the fire department. I'm so sick and tired of hearing fire and life safety. Really? I know women's nail salons have more chemicals and 1,000 square feet than I have in some of my manufacturing buildings that are in 50,000 feet. And I got a 10-inch main coming from the street to make sure that building is appropriately sprinkled. Okay, I get it. But nobody really cares about the length of time. So what I've got here is I got people that are so polarized. You know, God, Tim, I'm grateful to hear what you have to say. There's no meeting in the middle. That's why we are so constipated, because nobody wants to give. Legislatures don't want to give, interests don't want to give, and so who pays is we pay. We pay in time. I've taken manufacturing companies and moved into Indian reservations in the state of Arizona because the city doesn't like, the city and state don't like because they machine a certain metal. So I moved into Indian reservation. I took non-precision plastics and I moved it to Guadalajara. That company is now coming back because technology's gotten so great. Instead of 30 people operating a particular division today, it's operating with one person, 3 machines, and operates all 3 machines. So yeah, onshoring is coming back, but it's coming back with the technology, not because you guys have eased up regulation.
See, I agree with you about the problem, but I don't agree with you that the reason that things aren't improving is because we're polarized. The reason they're not improving is because we don't have enough people fighting for you. We have the people who have been in control for almost 20 years are the same people. The same exact party has controlled this state. And our side, Republicans or freedom lovers, basically have...
I'm a freedom lover. Just
I'm glad you got some bipartisan already. But here's the problem, is they've stopped fighting. They've literally stopped fighting for you to the point that it's like, oh, let's just negotiate away. Well, I was at an event the other day with the apartment association, walked around the thing and talked to every business owner, all kinds of industries, and just said, how can government improve your life? How can we get out of your way? One guy, a plumber, sought me out, chased me down, grabbed me and cornered me. And he said, to do a $150 plumbing repair, I have to build a $600 tent to comply with California law because of the lead. That's insane. So now it's taking me 3 days to do what should be a 2 or 3 hour job. That's absolute insanity. I went out to Tronan, way out in the middle of nowhere, where they pull stuff out of the lake, and it's all non-chemical. It's a very clean process, but they need a tremendous amount of energy. Their biggest issue, they spent $20 million of their money over a 10-year period protecting 150 ducks that land in this brine lake. And they have to build a duck hospital. They built a little duck pond, and the ducks don't go to the duck pond, but 150 ducks die. So they forced the company to build a shooting range, a private duck blind, so people can kill ducks to offset it up in the mountains. I don't know how that makes any sense, but it's okay to kill the ducks with a shotgun, but not to let them die naturally because they fly in and get covered in brine. But they've made it this company's responsibility because we have unelected boards like the Fish and Game, like CARB, who are responsive to no one. That power right now, that rests with the governor. If we got the governor, if we had a governor that appointed people that understood what it took to run a business and put affected industries on the CARB board, put affected industries on Fish and Game, put affected industries on all these different boards, water, resources, and all that, then all of a sudden we'd have some kind of balance and some kind of, because one of the fundamental concepts of government is consent of the governed. And that includes business owners because they're people. Business owners are people. People own corporations. And I think they need a voice for a change. And I think that we're going to have to keep pushing. It's not just going to happen because we want to be nice and get along. I've tried to work with every single person up in that Capitol, but the people on the other side of the aisle that are reasonable, they get bullied by the people who want to have control over everything. So I'm hoping to God there's a change after November, and we get some more reasonable people up there. Then come up and give us your ideas, and we'll see if we can get something done.
I actually have a question for Kim and for Tim. When you mentioned tort reform and the idea that there's all these illegitimate lawsuits, I think most of them are based on existing laws. So, for example, when you have Walmart, you talk about brakes, but there are companies that don't always have brakes. Now, largely, most companies comply, but Walmart actually was sued in the not far past for not giving brakes, battens, brakes, wheel brakes, etc. And so there's a real problem with just saying, oh, let's limit lawsuits. I think I agree with the point of the gentleman over there and Tim that the permitting process takes too long and the transparency may not be there. But the other thing about lawsuits is, what about the judge and the jury? There's a jury of our peers, and the judge is A lot of the time, or I think sometimes they're pointed out, not too familiar with the law court processes, but there is oversight in some respect. We do have a democracy, and we can open up, as I think Tim is sort of suggesting. My other point is that when people talk about it being a Republican or Democratic issue, I think we all agree that there's some need for regulation. We don't want, for example, what was it, Lockheed with the, look, there's chromium in the waters in Burbank. If anyone remembers the movie Aaron Brockovich, people getting cancer. That's a regulatory issue. It's not just ducks, it's not just frogs or toads, it's people. So my question is, how would you fix the lawsuits issue?
Yeah, thanks for your question, and I apologize if I gave the impression that I thought that my organization thought that all lawsuits were bad, or that there wasn't an appropriate place for lawsuits for truly injured people or truly misbehaving companies. That's, I do tend to focus on the ridiculous and crazy examples, but there's absolutely a place, that's what our courts are for. It's one of the tenets of our democracy. It's one of the reasons that this country is a great thing. The problem is that we tend to, our lawmakers in California have tended to make it very difficult for the oversight processes of judges and juries to weed out the ridiculous lawsuits and leave space for the truly legitimate ones. And